The New York Jets coaching carousel continues to spin as the Jets have interviewed their 16th head coaching candidate. Will it be a Sweet 16? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk, your home for the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Nolan Rich. We have a lot of great content tonight, and we have a list. Everyone loves a top 5 list. So tonight, I will give you my top 5 coaching candidates from the 16 interview. Now, before we get into this, let's dive into a long history, what seems like a long history, but it's been basically 3 weeks. These are the head coaches that the Jets have interviewed starting since January the 2nd, which again was before the end of week 18. Ron Rivera, Mike Vrabel, Rex Ryan, Matt Nagy, Aaron Glenn, Mike Loxley, Steve Spagnuolo, Darren Rizzi, Jeff Ulbrich, Vance Joseph, Arthur Smith, Bobby Slowick, Brian Flores, Jeff Hafley, Josh McCown, and today, Joe Witt Jr., who is the defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. And I know what you're thinking. A lot of you are thinking they picked the wrong coordinator from Washington to interview. So before we dive in, make sure to comment. And if you want to make sure that your comment is read, make sure to use that super chat feature so your comment goes to the front of the line and you are guaranteed a spot to be on the show tonight. There is a lot to talk about, but I also want to tell people, if you're joining us after the show, the live stream, make sure to leave us a comment. We'll get back to you. We want to hear your questions, your thoughts for videos, what types of Jets content you want during the offseason. But I want to preface this video by saying the following. So this top 5 list is a unique one because this isn't my top 5. Like if I was in charge of the Jets, these are the 5 candidates that would be at the top of my list. This is the top of my list from the coaches that the Jets have interviewed. So if the Jets have not interviewed a coach, they are not going to be on this list. Now, again, by the time recording this on Sunday, there could be a couple of other interviews coming down the pike, and that will obviously, down in the future, adjust it. So if we have a couple more interviews, which wouldn't shock me, then we can adjust the list accordingly. But at the time of this recording, the Jets have interviewed the following 16 candidates that I just mentioned. So the list is an interesting one. And there is a demarcation for me. I will tell you where that line is, because if they get that candidate above, I think I'll be happy. And I think most Jet fans would be happy. However, it's not going to be easy the first 2. I'm not going to lie. I think a lot of people are going to yell, scream, kick. But here's the thing. The thing is, these are of the candidates that the Jets have interviewed. And yes, it is a long list. Yes, there's a lot of variety. But picking through and also hearing through the grapevine, a couple of the coaches that the Jets are interested in. So again, I want to preface this by saying it. This is my top 5 of the 16 they've interviewed. This isn't my personal top 5, and I'll explain some of the coaches and some of the things in this coaching cycle, which I think is frustrating the Jets fans and how they've handled this whole situation. But let's get it started. Number 5 on our list, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive into it. It is Arthur Smith. Now, I know a lot of people are rolling their eyes very hard, but according to Rich Cimini, this is a very real candidate. And here's the thing. The Jets, the big thing is a lot of this is they're looking for a head coach with experience. I know Arthur Smith has a losing record, but he's an offensive coach, someone that has done a good job in Pittsburgh this year, someone that Mike Tomlin valued to have on that staff. So look, I do think this would not be a popular hire. I don't think that this would go over well with the fan base. But when I look at the rest of the list, this is a better hire than a Ron Rivera. This is a better hire than a Rex Ryan. There is a lot of guys on this list. And again, this list, I'm not going to lie, hasn't been pretty for the interview list. But for my number 5, Arthur Smith, and again, I wouldn't personally be excited, but I do think that this is a candidate that if the Jets announce he's the head coach, would it absolutely blindside me? Not really. But that leads me to my number 4 choice. My number 4 choice of the interviewed candidates is Matt Nagy. Now, here's the thing with Nagy. Yes, I understand he's been with Kansas City. Yes, I understand he's Patrick Mahomes, OC. I get all that. But one thing that I will say about Nagy over Arthur Smith, at least he has a winning record as a National Football League head coach. This is someone that has been a head coach. This is someone that's been a head coach in a major market in Chicago. This is someone that is an offensive-minded head coach. And again, if I'm looking at this list honestly, the things I want with the mess of the Jets right now is I want someone with experience, someone I lead more offensively. And look, this is the last candidate below my line of demarcation. I have a top three. If the Jets pick the top three, I wouldn't be upset. And I think that they are decent hires. Nagy is the one that's just below the fence where it makes logically, you can tell me it makes sense. He's had the experience. He's been a head coach. He's an offensive guy. But this is also someone like, if you had to tell me, cutting down between Arthur Smith and Matt Nagy, I'd give it to Nagy because, again, working in Kansas City, working in an organization that has had a lot of success, might even win another Super Bowl this year, is something to definitely keep an eye on, and has experience as a head coach in a market and also a big market with a winning record. So here's the line. Every candidate from here on up, 3, 2, and 1, I feel like a lot of Jet fans, if they were announced these hires, would feel pretty good about. And I, to be honest, think that these are my top 3 candidates. And anyone outside of these top 3 right now, again, this is my list, and I have to keep reminding people, this is of the candidates they've interviewed. I'll get to the candidates they haven't interviewed, but this is from the list of people they have interviewed, of the 16 candidates. So here we go. Number 3, Aaron Glenn. Now, I know Aaron Glenn right now is probably the front runner to be the Jets head coach. There's a lot I like about Aaron Glenn. I love his passion. I love that he has a great defense. I love that he's able to, that he has the history here with the Jets, that he's played with the Jets, that he personally played under their big turnaround under Bill Parcells. But there's a couple of things with Aaron Glenn. And look, a lot of the Jet players seemingly really like him. A lot of former Jets are really hot on him. So if they hire Aaron Glenn, I don't think it would be an awful hire. But there's just a couple of things about this that are preventing it from being a home run hire for me. And it's nothing against Aaron Glenn personally. I still think he has a lot of the tools to be a good head coach. And look, the last game against Washington, I know a lot of fans may have jumped ship. He's lost so many players on that defense. They're basically playing with scraps, and they went up against a great quarterback. So, again, I don't judge him as harshly. I actually think it was a worse game for Ben Johnson than it was for Aaron Glenn. But here's the things I worry about. He's a passionate defensive coordinator that gets the most out of players. Where have I heard that before? Oh, yes, it was Rex Ryan. Oh, yes, it was Robert Saleh. So I'm sorry. Like, I love the Glenn connection that he used to play for the Jets, that he would seemingly has told people that the Jets are his number one job. There's a lot I like about that. I like his comments that he needs to be both an offensive defensive coach. I think he has a better understanding, and he's going to get on the asses of players, which is something I really personally appreciate and this team desperately needs. But I don't want someone new on the job taking this over. I don't want someone that has no head coach experience getting thrown into this blender, thrown into this market. Can he handle a presence like Aaron Rodgers for a season? Is he going to be willing to do that as a first-time head coach? What's his offense going to look like? What's his offensive staff going to look like? What if his offensive staff gets hired? Can they be able to have enough connections in the league, enough pieces? Look, if the Jets hired Aaron Glenn, I know a couple of things. I know that they will be more buttoned up, that they'll have a very good defense, and I do think they're going to have a ground and pound mentality for an offense. But there's just a lot of questions I have, and it just feels like Einstein's definition of insanity. People that continue to make the same mistake and expect different results. Like, think about the Jets. Outside of Adam Gase, the Jets have hired a defensive-minded coach or a defensive coordinator to be the head coach. Todd Bowles, Rex Ryan, Herm Edwards. Like, we've been on this wheel for 25 years, and it just seems like more of the same old thing. And again, I think there's a lot of attributes I like about Glenn. I think that he brings a personality that they desperately need in this front office, but there's still a lot of questions. But here's the other thing. I think when you have been as bad as the Jets have been, that sometimes you need a whole new perspective. Sometimes when you're at this point, you need to basically swing for the fences. And the more I thought about this offseason, there's been one candidate that I would rather have than Aaron Glenn. And I think it will shock a lot of you, but Josh McCown. So Josh McCown has come out and said, originally, I wanted him to be the Jets OC. Now he has come out and said, I'm only leaving if I get a head coaching job. Now, he's never been a coordinator, which I get. But there's a couple of things I really like about Josh McCown. Number one, he's played with the Jets more recently. Number two, he's played with the Jets under the Johnson family. Number three, according to everyone, he is well liked and respected with everyone in that organization. He's had such an impact, and he's a beloved guy. And look, this is someone that even the Texans a couple years ago were interviewing to be a head coach despite not having this experience. Sorry, I just have a little bit of a cough. So with McCown, if I'm going to get frisky and I'm going to take a big risk, Josh McCown is it. Like, if you're going to play the coordinator roulette or the non-experienced head coach roulette, give me Josh McCown. Because the other thing I look at too is the Jets are going to have to develop a quarterback within the next year or two. Maybe even this offseason, depending on what happens to Aaron Rodgers. Sorry. So if that is the case and I'm the Jets, I would seriously think about bringing in Josh McCown to be like, okay, we get an offensive guy. The system's not going to change. We get a quarterback that can help develop a future quarterback. Maybe it's a quarterback this year. Maybe it's a quarterback next year. Like, this is, to me, someone that when I look at the upside compared to Aaron Glenn, and look, Aaron Glenn's been a great coordinator. Aaron Glenn has a great history with the Jets. But Aaron Glenn also had a history with the Jets where he only was under the Johnson brothers for 2 years. I mean, you look at Josh McCown, he was there under the Johnsons. He knows what this fan base has gone through most recently. He understands the New York market, and there's not a person that will say a bad word. Not to say anyone will say a bad word about Aaron Glenn, but there's not someone that's going to say a bad word about Josh McCown. And look, if the Jets are going to take a big swing, if they want to take a big swing on someone that's not a head coach, the most important position, as we've seen in these playoffs, are the quarterbacks. Look at the quarterbacks that are making runs in the playoffs. Look at the teams with great offensive innovation, great offensive minds. These are guys and teams that are winning in the postseason. And if Josh McCown impresses enough people, if enough people buy into him in that building, and you feel that he has the potential to be a great head coach and connect with a lot of people within this organization, I say go for it. I say, you know what? It wouldn't be the ugliest hire, and compared to some of the guys on this list, I would be probably more excited because there's a little bit of the unknown with Josh McCown. There's a lot of upside. It's a big swing, but hey, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world. And my number one choice now, again, some people might think this has been dampened by the news of Josh McCown only want to be a head coach, but my number one is Brian Flores. When the Jets came into this process, they were looking for certain boxes. Number one, do they have experience being a head coach? Check. Have they had success being a head coach? Check. With Brian Flores, he's coached in the AFC. Check. With Brian Flores, he's beaten teams like the Patriots with Bill Belichick there. When I also look at Brian Flores, you look at him, local guy, understands the New York market. But the other thing I look at Brian Flores is there's two huge things that I really like about him. Number one, look at the people that have hired him. You look at Minnesota, you look at Pittsburgh. When you think of well-run organizations the last 5 to 10 years, those are the top of the list. And those are coaches that are well-respected, and they wanted him on their staff. But number two, and I've been saying this for weeks, I think with Flores, there's extra incentive to Brian Flores coming here. I think Brian Flores wants to prove that he can win the AFC again. I think Brian Flores feels a little bit betrayed by the Patriots for not even giving him an interview and an opportunity. But more importantly, this is someone that has an axe to grind with someone in your division. This is someone that basically got railroaded by the Miami Dolphins because he refused to tank, because he didn't want Tua, but he wanted Justin Herbert. And ultimately, he looked like he made the right decision. And again, this is someone that sued the NFL, and I get that there's a lot there, but he's shown to me he can handle the media, and I think he wants to stick it to the NFL, but more importantly to the Dolphins, saying, you know what? You made a mistake by letting me go. And I'm going to remind you twice a year about the biggest mistake that franchise has made. So look, when I look at these coaching candidates, yes, I like the upside of some of these guys, but Brian Flores to me has the safest floor. I know he can win in this league. I know he's going to have a good defense. I know he's going to get on players. I know he's going to be disciplined. Yes, he probably will rub some people the wrong way. But when we started this process, Jet fans were looking for someone like Parcells, who is not going to accept this crap anymore. They wanted someone that was going to be a disciplinarian. They wanted someone with head coaching experience and success in the NFL. And really, Flores has checked off all the boxes of a potential head coach. Now, like I said, if any of the top 3 hires on my list are picked, I will be happy with them. But overall, I think Brian Flores, when you look at what he can bring to the table, is my number 1 coaching candidate of all the Jets coaching candidates that they've interviewed. And again, in a perfect world, I would love Josh McCown to be his OC. McCown has said he won't only leave if he becomes a head coach, but also tells me Josh McCown understands he's probably going to get a head coaching opportunity in the next year or two. So that's why I have him number 2. Like maybe the Jets beat teams a year or two early to the punch, unlike the Jets always see me being late to the party. But those are my top 5 candidates. And a friendly reminder, because I see some of the comments coming, and I know I'm going to get a lot of comments. This is off of the people they have interviewed. So if you were looking for Cliff Kingsbury, Mike McCarthy, Pete Carroll, they haven't been interviewed by the Jets. Now, if they get interviewed, that obviously changes this list, but that is why they are there. So let me get to some of your comments. Again, use that super chat feature so you don't miss your comment gets to the front of the line. But I will also break down the coaching candidates of the Jets haven't interviewed, because apparently they'll interview everyone except a lot of the guys that the Jets and their fan base really want. Aaron Glenn is realistically the only option. Woody doesn't want McCarthy. I don't think Woody and Flores will mesh well. The Jets didn't even interview Kingsbury. Sloak isn't good. McCown is a joke. So it does seem like Micro Fox wants Aaron Glenn. Look, I also like this comment from Micro Fox. Bill O'Brien, like I was someone on my list this offseason, and I was hoping the Jets would call him, but I think it's pretty clear that he doesn't want to leave Boston College, at least yet. So the thing, too, we also have to remember, because Micro Fox brought this up a little bit, because he brought up interviewing Mike McCarthy, interviewing Cliff Kingsbury. So that leads me to my next point. So I think that there are 4 candidates that Jet fans are really upset the Jets haven't interviewed. So I'll break down each one. I'll start with Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll was someone that even I, at the beginning, was like, I thought they would interview. But for me, I thought he'd be a better president of football operations. But Connor Hughes has reported that he talked to people from the camp of Carroll, and Carroll's camp wasn't really interested in the Jets. It was kind of like the Ben Johnson situation where it seemed like they dropped feelers like, yeah, not really interested. And I get it. For me, Pete Carroll, if he wants to come back, I think he's looking for a Super Bowl ready roster or a team just on the cusp. And he doesn't want to be spending all this time rebuilding a program, especially at his age. I think that's part of the reason why the Jets don't appeal him. Don't forget, too, this was his first stop, and it didn't go well. And I do wonder if that's part of the reason, like, he has no interest. So let's get to Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury, to me, is a fascinating person because, yes, when we see what he can do with quarterbacks, it is very impressive. It is very impressive to see how he's developed an offense, and it's fun watching Washington. But Kingsbury, to me, is always someone that intrigues me, but in an odd way, because he seems like, as an OC or a quarterback coach, unbelievable. But we saw it so many times with the Cardinals where they would fall off the rails in the second half of the season. They were undisciplined in the second half of the season. There just is something there about Cliff Kingsbury that just seems a little off as a head coach. And he struggled to handle the media in Arizona. I don't think he'd handle it well in New York. Kingsbury, though, is someone, though, here's my thing. And this is part of the optics of the Jets interviewing process. The problem is when you interview 16 candidates and you don't interview some of the hot candidates, it kind of disengages the fan base. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of frustration from the Jet fans. It's not only that this process has been going slow, but the candidates that they are looking at, and some of the obvious choices, they're not even interviewing. Like Cliff Kingsbury would be one just to pick his brain offensively. Another one, too, that I've seen a lot of fans bring up online is Todd Monken. And I love Tom Monken, but don't forget, the Jets also interviewed him and Kingsbury before hiring Adam Gase. Now, my big thought was, well, maybe they'll go back and interview them because it wasn't Woody. It was more Christopher running that operation at that point. So I was a little surprised that they're not looking at that. And to me, it seems a little odd that the Jets feel like they can thumb their nose at candidates when they have been bad the last 14 years. But it is kind of funny, though, when you look at the head coaching interviews. I mean, Ron Rivera, I don't think was a serious candidate, but maybe a DC candidate. So I don't hate that. Mike Vrabel was obvious. Rex Ryan, again, now in retrospect, I get the fan service, but at the same time, it's like, if you weren't really that serious about bringing him back, you just wasted an interview opportunity. Matt Nagy, I understood. Aaron Glenn, obviously. But then you have Mike Locksley, and you're like, well, why are the Jets interviewing Mike Locksley? Like, they're going to interview Mike Locksley, a losing college coach right now, over some of these other candidates. Steve Spagnuolo, Darren Rizzi, Jeff Ulbrich. Like, Jeff Ulbrich, to me, was almost like a pity interview, but it's like, why are we even giving him a pity interview when you knew he wasn't going to get hired? I mean, Vance Joseph, I get a little bit just because of the previous head coaching experience. Bobby Slowick, I get being the OC for the Texans. I mean, but then you look at some of these other ones, like Joe Wood Jr. today. Like, were you guys watching? Yeah, Washington had a good defense performance, but how are you not calling Cliff Kingsbury after what he has done with Jada Daniels? I mean, Washington is showing people that if you get the quarterback right and you get this process right, you can turn it around quickly. And look, they're in the championship game. No one would have thought that they would have been in the championship game. Like, and Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator for the Packers, like, why is he getting interviewed? Like, it just doesn't seem like some of these candidates are really serious. Like, if you were telling me they're interviewing like a DB or a linebacking coach, and I'd be like, okay, maybe they could be the DC or something, but some of these coaching ones are just like mind-numbing. So then that leads me to Mike McCarthy. McCarthy is one I don't get. And look, I do know there's some portion of the fan base that doesn't like McCarthy. If McCarthy has been said he's interested in the head coaching job, they need to at least bring him in. And I said McCarthy needs to be brought in for two reasons. Number one, he's won over 60% of his games, won 12 games 3 straight years, and also dealt with Jerry Jones. And the one team that might even have more media exposure than the New York Jets. And number two, he's worked with Aaron Rodgers. At the very least, could we pick his brain about could Aaron Rodgers make sense for one more season? Like, the upside to me of bringing in Mike McCarthy for an interview, like this is the problem when you have such a wide open thing. If you have all these candidates and some of these candidates you scratch your head at, like, did Todd Monken tell the Jets no? Like, is that why they're not bringing him in? Did he poll like Ben Johnson secretly tell people like, hey, there's no interest in the Jets? But it's like, do you have Todd Monken out there? He can't even get an interview. Mike McCarthy can't get an interview, but you'll interview the DC from the Commanders and the Packers. Like, it just optically to this fan base just doesn't seem like you're taking it seriously, even though I do think the Jets are taking it seriously and are trying to look at every possible avenue, try to find every possible solution. But you look at some of these candidates and it's like, did we really need to spend an interview on Rex Ryan and not Mike McCarthy? Like, and the other one too is John Gruden. Now, my thoughts on Gruden are, I think Gruden is a great coach. I think he's great, especially on television. But it wasn't going great with the Raiders last time. And here's the other thing. The Jets don't need a distraction. I think Gruden would be a massive distraction. So I've never been one that's been pounding the table for Gruden. Could you have brought him in for an interview? Sure. But I'm more hurt that you're not bringing in McCarthy. And a lot of these coaches are people that supposedly the Jets, back in 2019 were more impressed with Adam Gase, who won 26% of his games as the head coach of the Jets. And they didn't hire Monken. They didn't hire McCarthy. They didn't hire Kingsbury. Is it a pride thing? The Jets are embarrassed that they have to go back and interview them? Is that what it is? Or did these guys tell the Jets because they didn't hire us the first time, we don't want to talk to them? Like, there seems like a massive disconnect. And for the Jets to like look at guys like McCarthy and say, yeah, we don't think you're great for the long-term success of our program because you haven't had a lot of postseason success. Here's the thing. He gets to the postseason. The Jets haven't made to the postseason. Can I take the fifth on that and basically come back and have the opportunity to debate whether that is an opportunity to play in the postseason? I think it does audition. I think that's part of it. But what information are you getting by the last two interviews interviewing DCs of the Packers and the Commanders? Like, it feels like some of these are almost throwaway interviews. And to me, it bothers me that there are a lot of candidates out there. And when you came into this process and you were telling the fans, we want a guy that has experience, that has been successful in this league, that has been able to put together wins, that can build a program. And you have people like that in Mike McCarthy out there, or guys that have had head coaching experience in Cliff Kingsbury out there. And you're interviewing all these, like, outside of Aaron Glenn and maybe Josh McCown, what's like a rising coaching candidate that's on other guys' radars? I mean, they won't even interview Cohn from the Buccaneers, which to me is surprising, who's the offensive coordinator there. It's just so frustrating because it seems like the Jets might even be overthinking this. I think the worst interview, like Rex, I get, because if they didn't give him an interview with how he was pining nationally, maybe they were worried about blowback from the fan base. Maybe they were worried about that. Okay, you give Rex an interview, and a lot of this is on Zoom, so they're not doing a lot of in-person interviews. So I get that. But the one that really, I think, turned the tide for a lot of Jet fans was Mike Locksley. Because Locksley has been the Maryland head coach, is 32-36, was 4-8 last year. And yes, he served as the OC for Alabama in 2018. But you're looking at the Jets and you're like, really? He gets an interview. He will get an interview, but Mike McCarthy is not good enough for an interview. You gave Jeff Ulbrich an interview who you knew you weren't keeping. You knew you weren't keeping, yet you had to give Jeff Ulbrich an interview. Was it a pity interview? You interviewed Darian Rizzi. Okay, he was 3-5 as the interim head coach for the Saints. Are you thinking about bringing him in as a coordinator? I know he's from the New Jersey area, but he was a special teams coordinator. Is he going to be your new special teams coordinator? Like, is that why you brought him in? Like, Arthur Smith is a losing head coach in this league. You brought him in? I mean, I get Brian Flores, McCown with his history, but then you turn around today and you interview Joe Witt Jr. Yesterday, you interviewed Jeff Hafley. And look, I think the Packers defense has been okay, but this is who you want to be your head coach? And it's just an odd situation, too, when you are like half-stepping this, where you're half-stepping this and you're going, we want someone with a lot of experience. But then we're interviewing these coordinators who have a ton of experience, or not really rising people. To me, it's just one of those interesting things where when I look at some of the people that I interview, it's like, really, like, could we have interviewed anyone else? I mean, if we're going to interview 16 people, we couldn't have a more expansive search. But let me know what you guys think. I want to hear from you in the comments. Make sure you use the super chat feature. Make sure to check out the other videos and also subscribe so you miss any of our Jets content. Because don't worry, when the Jets hire their GM and head coach, which I do think will happen at some point in the next week, we will react to that. And I do know, no matter who the Jets pick, I do think there's going to be a lot of frustration, because Vrabel was a pipe dream. When Vrabel was taken away, I think that really hurt this fan base's psyche. And I just look at these candidates. I think if you hire Flores, there's going to be people that don't like him because he was a Dolphin, because he failed as a head coach there. If you hire, McCown, well, he doesn't have the experience. He hasn't even been a coordinator. If you hire, going down the list, you just keep going, okay, well, I'm not exactly sure if, for example, Aaron Glenn, again, didn't finish the season well, defensive coordinator, we've been down this road. And then after those three, it feels like even if you have like a Matt Nagy, it's like a tough sell. Like, yeah, he won games in Chicago, but he failed there as a head coach. Yeah, Arthur Smith failed as a head coach. Like, I think it will be very telling, too, as part of this process. And why I think we have to keep an eye on this is, who do they bring back for a second round? Because they haven't gotten the second round yet. I think that's the other thing, too, is they're going all these interviews. One of the GM candidates is already off the board, which is frustrating. But it's also like you see Cliff Kingsbury in that offense put on that show and you don't even request an interview. Like, how, like, again, do I think Kingsbury is going to be the perfect fit for the Jets? No, but at least he's played with the Jets more recently than Aaron Glenn has. So it's just like, well, we want to bring Aaron Glenn because he was a former Jet. Well, Cliff Kingsbury was a former Jet too. Why don't you, I don't know, bring him in for an interview? He seems to know about quarterbacks. Could you pick his brain? Get an idea? Maybe even Cliff Kingsbury gives you an idea of, hey, this is a really good quarterback coach who I think could be a really good coordinator. It could help lead you to a good offensive coordinator if you want to hire an Aaron Glenn. But those are my top 5 candidates again. These are my top 5 candidates of the 16. So when I did this list, this isn't the top 5 because if it was my top 5, Mike McCarthy would be in here. Probably Cliff Kingsbury. It would be a very different list. But out of the 16 candidates the Jets have interviewed so far, these are my top 5. Again, my big thing is the top 3. If you get outside the top 3, I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment and a lot more questions about the staff. But I do think that where they are right now and where this team is, if they could somehow go through point to point and get one of those top 3 candidates, I do think that it will be very impactful. But once we get below the top 3, then I think you're going to see a lot of, panic among the fan base, a lot of Rico the Pub. How often is it leaked that a head coach has no interest in a team? I wonder how many coaches have said no thank you to interviewing with us. Yeah, Rico, if I had to guess, I think Monken probably was hurt. Like, you've heard that through the grapevine when he wasn't hired over Adam Gase. I do think Ben Johnson told people in the back channels he wasn't interested. Pete Carroll told people in the back channels he wasn't interested. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe that will eventually come out like, hey, this is one of the reasons why we didn't even interview this guy. Like, maybe Kingsbury told the Jets, you know what, you interviewed me before, you didn't want me, I don't want you now. Maybe that's the case. But I just think the optics to this fan base right now, when you're trying to reinvent the wheel supposedly or bring in a different change of culture, and a lot of it just feels like the same old kind of candidates, can get frustrating. But thank you guys for joining us. We'll be back throughout this week. We'll be updating you with all the latest and greatest on the New York Jets, including the updates in the head coaching search and, of course, the GM search. I expect someone to get picked throughout this week. Again, if you're joining us after the live stream, make sure to comment below. And if you're joining us, make sure to put your comments. If you want to make sure it's read, use the super chat feature so that your comment goes to the front of the line and it is read. But again, guys, the top 5 coaching candidates out of the 16 interviews, again, Arthur Smith is number 5. Matt Nagy is number 4. Aaron Glenn, number 3. Number 2, Josh McCown, who's my dark horse. But again, there's a lot of smoke around McCown, so I would not be shocked. And I also would ask Jet fans, like, if you had to pick between my top 3 and Brian Flores, if you had to pick between those big 3, who's the head coach out of that 3? That trifecta, who you would want to be your head coach? Let us know in the comments below. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Jet content throughout the offseason. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time here on Rich Sports Talk.